Our topic is Gary Hilliard and what he's contributed to Senior Solutions. When I first was introduced to Gary, I went down to Brattleboro and met him in his office, and I was so excited about being part of Senior Solutions, especially after hearing how Gary got really involved with our senior population, because he made that connection when he was a very young boy. And that really intrigued me because I had some very common experiences in my neighborhood with the elderly who I would mow their lawns, not for money, and just got to know them. And I learned a lot and I got a lot of respect for as we age. We change a little, but we still have that human compassion. And I think it's so important how we at Senior Solutions really want our seniors to be successful, resilient as they age. And Gary, could you jump on with that story a little bit about how you really got involved with the elderly population at a very young age?
Well, back in the days when I was even before my teens, I always hung around, and I'll just say it in plain words, I always hung around the old guys. I didn't hang around kids at school. I didn't go out for a lot of sports, but I always hung around old guys. They gravitated to me. They seemed to like me. They thought I was funny, but I was smart. So I knew as a kid, I knew I wasn't a pain in the butt to them. Oh. So you really felt, wanted, really wanted. And so I found that, in ways my mom and dad always said I was an adult before I was an adult, because I always thought more mature than the other kids I would have been hanging around with. So that's kind of where it started. So I always gravitated towards older adults. And then the way I actually got hooked up with our agency, I'll just talk about that.
But wait, before you get in too far into it, Gary, we really should tell people what you do and what Senior Solutions does. Real quick.
Absolutely. First of all, what Senior Solutions does is we work with folks 60 and over. We help in all kinds of areas of their life, however we can. We advocate for them. That's probably the first and foremost. We advocate for their rights and things that they're entitled to, or things that they would like that, is if any way feasible. The case managers work with them in our senior helpline in very creative ways of trying to figure out problem solving with them, but yet be client-centered, only what they want, what they choose, not what we feel that they need. It's what they need, what they want. And so that's a lot of what we do. I mean, we help them with healthcare and benefit programs and funding resources and any grants they might be entitled to, caregiver support, respite, all kinds of things. I mean, I always thought between our senior helpline, and we have lots of volunteers that, boy, they accent all those services. I mean, there are like our real out there in the field folks that are, on the front line. And so we do lots for folks, with nutrition even, and housing, and sometimes it's financial stuff, but you name it, we try to help solve problems.
Yeah, Gary, and Jim, sometimes I think that our little Keeping Up with Senior Solutions show should actually be a mini series. Senior Solutions does so incredibly many things for our aging population. And, it's hard to encapsulate it all. But thanks for trying.
So at any rate, that was the kind of stuff. So to make a long story short, I had worked with a fella who was very elderly, and he had Alzheimer's, and I got sort of recruited by the Public Guardian program, and that was Mike Atlee at the time, about 28 years ago. And he had a fellow he wanted to see. He ran an ad to see if somebody could come over and sort of just check in on him a lot. And I did that. And my wife saw the ad, and I thought, she goes, "You'd be great at this. You ought to go see this fella." So to make a long story short, I did, and I started getting pretty involved, staying there and trying to help him and support him. And he was a Green Mountain Railroad engineer in his day, and he had photos of every engine you could think of in Vermont. from the Green Mountain Railroad. And he may have had advanced Alzheimer's, but he could tell you everything about every one of those engines. He knew this one took a lot of coal and that one didn't. And this
Right,
one, oh my God, this was a bear. And he went on. But yet he had Alzheimer's, and sometimes he couldn't even remember anyone's name when they came there. Got to a point where he was terminal, and he knew he wanted to still die at home. And so I started spending even more time the last week of his life there. And when he passed, he stayed at home. And Mike Atley told me, he goes, "Hey, I know this job available, and I used to do it. And I think you'd be really great at it, and I can put a good word in for you." And so that was my change of careers. And
We're
next thing
lucky
you know,
for
I got
us.
the job, and I've been with him ever since.
That's wonderful, Gary. We're so lucky to have you. You know, you do such a great job supervising all the case managers and doing so many things. And today, especially, I'm hoping that you will share some of your insights into self-neglect.
Well, self-neglect came about, I'm going to guess and say probably for us to do it about, I'm going to say 20 something years ago, still 22 years ago or so. The state asked if we would do it because this AAA's, the Area Agencies on Aging in the state, because it used to be Adult Protective Services that did that. As we all know, Adult Protective Services does neglect on the part of another, not self-neglect, but they do neglect and they do abuse and exploitation for the elderly. And they were doing self-neglect at the time, and so it was taken off their plate and put on ours. And for quite a while, it was unfunded. And then finally, over time, the state realized it was such an important topic and so forth. We started getting some funding for it. So it helped us at least sustain going out there and doing self-neglect investigations. So shall I talk a little bit about what self-neglect is?
yes.
Okay. Self-neglect, for the most part, it covers mainly three categories: a lack of obtaining essential food, shelter, or clothing, or medical care, or obtaining goods and services necessary to maintain physical health, mental health, or general safety, or managing one's own financial affairs. So those are three main categories, but it means, in essence, that cognitively, they talk about physically as well, but mostly cognitively, if they're not able to make good informed decisions and that sort of thing, then it might be considered self-neglect. If they are just making a lifelong choice like they had been, this is just a way of life with them, that's called self-determination. And the state is very strong about the senior citizens and all Vermont citizens of being able to make their own decisions. And if it's a way of life, that's their choice. It may not be my choice, it may not be yours or someone else's, and it may not be a good idea, but it's their idea and it's how they live their life. And it's so important, to really tease that out, because sometimes we'll get, reports from hospitals or even nursing homes that, somebody went home AMA against medical advice. Well, that happens all the time. And it doesn't mean that they're cognitively don't understand. Sometimes they just don't want to be there any longer and they want to go home.
Right.
And so it's a right to make that choice. So sometimes we'll get those kind of, reports, and we have to say, look, it's their right to make that decision, unless you're saying they really have no idea what they're doing and they're just going home. That's a different story. Then we might say, okay, that might be a self-neglect, and then we may look into it further. But if they make a conscious decision and they are very cognitively aware of what's going on, and that's their right. We may offer them help. If they want some help, we'll always do that and see if maybe they are entitled to some services that they didn't know, and that it might help sustain them at home longer and not be going back in and out of maybe the hospital or that sort of thing. So we may come up with some ideas if they're willing to listen. If they tell us to go away, then we have to go away. And even a self-neglect case where there's the cognitive issues, if they say, I don't want your help, get out of here, get out of my home, we have to go along with that. We can't force ourselves and will not force ourselves on anyone. Sometimes we're a little concerned because we may think, gosh, but even if we can leave them some information of ours, as an agency, they might think about us down the road, to say, oh, here's that card from so-and-so. Maybe I'll check with them to see if I can get help with this or that. We try creative ways to see if they'll accept us. And if they don't, they don't. And we just,
Now, will you match up a case manager with somebody that might be defined as self-neglect?
Yeah. That's part of my role in the agency as a supervisor. I supervise 9 case managers. We're located throughout Windham and Windsor County, all the way south from Vernon to all the way up north to Thetford. So we have about 9 case managers, and one of them for their area will get assigned to investigate the self-neglect case. If we feel it's totally warranted, or sometimes some legwork gets done first. And if it's possibly ruled out because it really makes no sense whatsoever, or they won't accept our help, then that's a different story. A case manager gets assigned, and I'm the one that usually does the assignments.
Okay.
So we usually get a pretty good, the way to make a self-neglect referral is going through our senior helpline. So that's where they come in. That's our focal point, our entry
All right,
point.
what's that number?
That number is, I always have to look now since we had changed it before,
I always have to check.
866-673-8376, and that's toll free. Or then we have a local number in Springfield, if you're in the Springfield area, of 802-885-2669.
Great.
So, but that's our entry point. So anybody that's going to make a report, a lot of folks in the community still make reports to APS, Adult Protective Services. They're still of that mindset. Even hospitals still do, even though we try to educate sometimes.
Well, they were trained for a long time,
Right.
but they had to call there.
Absolutely. So I tell them not to do that, because that's like taking the slow boat to China. Because it eventually comes around to us, but then there's a delay, and we'd rather get it right away, as soon as it comes in. I usually try to assign somebody within that same day or the following day at the latest, and then they still have about 2 days to respond. But by then, usually what a case manager will do, if it's not a client of ours already, they'll do some legwork to do a little bit more investigation. It may say that a daughter's involved and this is her contact information, or a sister or somebody. But we try to follow up in the least intrusive way at first as we can. We would rather go, because if a client is very close to their daughter or their son or someone, well, then that's our ticket in. Because, if we can go with them and say, okay, how about, can we make a joint visit? Can I go with you? Or if we know the person gets Meals on Wheels, maybe, we try to be creative, and maybe we'll say, well, why don't I bring their meal that day?
Right.
And then, food is always a good entry point, right?
It would work with me.
But case managers are very creative, it almost sounds, when you say creative, like deceptive. It's certainly, we are not. That's the last thing we want to be, is deceptive.
They're trying to be respectful.
But we're trying to be respectful and non-threatening. And that's a key. That's a real key, not to be threatening. Because some folks, when you're trying to follow up with them, so some folks at times are even reluctant to want to share information, because maybe that's one more foot towards the nursing home or one more foot towards a hospital. And we're trying to make sure they understand that's the last thing we're wanting. We want to just help them where they're at, where they want to be, and go from there. But just to give a case example, a fellow who I used to see that lived in a barn, he used to say, when I would come see him at first, he'd say, oh, it's that state guy. But I knew once he dropped, it's that state guy, because I'd say, no, Fred, I'm not a state guy. Not at all. That's the last thing I am. I'd wear jeans because he lived in his barn. I didn't want to go in there in nice pair of slacks and tie and everything and look like a state guy. So I'd wear jeans too, and just try to be as non-threatening as I could. And after a while, when he just said, oh, it's just Gary, that was my ticket. Then I could get some things accomplished with him, because he knew I wouldn't do anything.
Because he got to know you. He got to know you and trust you.
It's about finding that common thread that you can share.
Absolutely. And it's just establishing a rapport, because a lot of times, some self-neglect situations, they didn't just come up that way all of a sudden.
Right.
It's been going on a while. So it's not like it's a real emergency that you've got to address it right away, because if you do, you probably turn them off anyway, and they'll tell you to,
That's right.
there's the door. And
Right.
so we do have pretty good luck, I think, and our case managers are pretty good about it. And they converse back and forth with me too for some brainstorming, so we can share the ideas that we might have on what might help them and not be threatening,
Great.
So trying to
I
think
think
what-
for your approach to life in general is very engaging. So I
Okay.
can see where, when you're going to see somebody who, maybe somebody else who has a different standard of how people should live, have reported, you go in with an open mind and an open heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And another part is even what we do also is we try to educate the community in understanding people's rights, because, sometimes people think that make the calls, they think we can sort of go put them in a nursing home, or they need to be somewhere safe. They're not safe. And it's helping them understand people's rights and decision-making and the powers that we don't have. And that's one of them. We can't just say, you know what, you really need to go to a facility and I'm going to help you get in there. So we have to, by educating the community, it at least lowers those expectations when they make those calls to say, we can't just do that. And then we educate them even with guardianships. They'll say they need a guardian. They have to have a guardian. And we'll say, we'll explain to them, anybody can petition the court for guardianship. Anybody. Doesn't mean they have to be the guardian either. But again, the person has rights, and until those rights are taken away, they're still their own person. And we certainly don't have that power.
Yeah, and it's not like we're anxious to have that power either.
No, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we, as a rule, pretty much don't petition the court. We let people know anyone can, and if that's what you're thinking needs to be done, or the family is, or whatever, then that's up to you to do. We can't tell you to do it or not do it. But the one thing I remembered Mike Atlee used to tell me, and this was really important. Mike Atlee's probably the biggest advocate I've ever seen for senior citizens in Vermont. Really, I mean that's probably what got me in, was Mike more than anything, because he has such an energy and such. If you're a case manager and you're having a tough time with self-neglect, Mike used to be a good sounding board too. But when people were pressuring for them to have a public guardian, Mike would explain the fact that, wouldn't you rather it be, if the person truly indeed needs a guardian, wouldn't you want it to be somebody they know? Somebody that knows who they were when they were cognitively okay. Before the Alzheimer's got to that point, he says, some guy like me just comes in there as a public guardian, and all I can do is do my best to think of what they would have wanted when they could understand the consequences, and when they could, understand what's happening. Mike was pretty passionate about that. So I'll tell you what he'd do. He would work all of us case managers over that until every stone was no stone was unturned. And he would locate a daughter out in Ohio, or maybe a son that was his favorite son out in Arizona, or, he would find somebody that knew this person. And it meant a lot to Mike to do that. And I'll tell you, I mean, he rubbed off. He really rubbed off.
That's wonderful.
So I'm trying to
It's
think of
really
what else I could tell you.
it's really stepping outside the box a little bit.
Absolutely.
And I've talked to many of the case managers, and they do have that ability
Yeah.
to do that. I had to do the survey on case managers, and it just was really eye-opening for me, the relationships the case managers have established by being just open and not being critical and not putting fences up.
Yeah.
They're amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. They really are. Self-neglect, I'll tell you, it's its own, I don't know how to explain it. It's its own kind of animal. Regular cases, when you're trying to work with and be creative about things, but self-neglect sometimes really, really, really makes you have to think outside the box a lot, because you're really trying so hard to help them if they need the help. but not be intrusive and
Right.
intrude on their self-determination. So, yeah, we
You
have
can't
some
take,
cases.
the case manager can't come in and say, well, you can't live this way. We got to clean this whole place up right now. And
Absolutely.
all of a sudden that person wants to run out of the room.
Yeah, yeah, you're totally right. And again, like I say, we just try not to be threatening in any way. And we do leave. I mean, case managers, sometimes it's hard for case managers sometimes because they
Right.
really truly do want to help them. But if they're being asked to leave, and we don't want you to come back, unfortunately, we have to abide by that. But sometimes, if whoever made the referral knows that was the case and they have a relationship with the person, sometimes it can, go a different way. There's been times where somebody needed some supports and socialization and they just didn't want to take that first step to go to adult day. So I'd say to a case manager, let them know you would meet them there and have lunch, that the two of you could have lunch there. Because then I always looked at it like, and not to compare the elderly with children, but I know when I was a kid and it was my first day of school, believe it or not, I was pretty shy. I was almost afraid because I didn't know anybody. And I think of some of our elderly folks who maybe haven't been out and about for quite some time, and you're taking them to a strange place and they see all these people and they don't really know anyone to talk to at first. So if a case manager has established a rapport and they say, you know what, we'll go have breakfast there together. I'll meet you there. Or, and I'll tell you, it's worked. It's worked many times in the past where people wouldn't have taken that first step. And when a case manager went with them that they knew and sat there, I mean, I did it myself. My God, I did it for my dad. When my mom died, I brought my father back here. And the Brattleboro Adult Day at the time said, you know what, Gary, he may be in New Hampshire and his long-term care Medicaid hadn't gone through. But the director at the time of the Adult Day in Brattleboro said, bring him in here anyway. We don't care. Just get him in here. Start getting him going. So I met my dad there and we had breakfast together. Of course, my dad loved coffee. That's all he loved. So I had the nurse say to him when he came in the door, Ed, the coffee's on. And she owned him from that point on.
Right.
And he loved it.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the thing. There's always a key
Yeah.
to any situation. If you can just find that key and make that personal connection.
Whatever it is,
Yeah.
that again, just developing a rapport. And I definitely can't stress that enough. That's the most important part of trying to be successful with self-neglect. Developing a rapport that when they see you, they're glad to see you.
Well, Gary, it's so I was in education for 54 years. And that's the same way I would tell my teachers how they need to relate to their kids, in the classroom. Make a connection. All right. The connection is more important than the math problem,
And let me tell you something else. Honestly, laughter. The best relationship you can get with some of the self-neglect cases we've had is that they realize, number one, you do what you say you're going to do. You follow through, that you're bright, but that you make them laugh sometimes, and not in a corny way, but something that they just tickles them. And the one thing I found in this business, everybody, I don't care how sick you are sometimes, everybody wants to laugh.
Yes.
They want to laugh at some point. And I remember our former director before, Carol, I remember telling her that one day. I said, to be honest with you, Joyce, I can make any client laugh. Anytime I go there,
That's
I
a
can make them
gift.
laugh.
That's right.
And seriously, I don't know if there's ever been one that I couldn't. For real. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth.
I believe it.
Because I wanted to make it a point. I mean, my own sister, when I call her out west right now and she's very sick, there's not one time that I can't make her laugh before I hang up.
Yeah, that's great, Gary.
And just that alone. So,
wow.
Anyway, other than that,
Gary, you're involved with the SASH program.
well, we work with them. Yeah, we interact with them and engage with them a lot. Some of our case managers go to some of their monthly meetings, where they discuss situations and cases and stuff like that and brainstorm and all that. Yeah.
What's the purpose of that organization? Is that to provide more support and
Yeah,
services
yeah.
for people at home?
yeah, yep. They originally started out in most of the senior housing complexes.
Okay.
But some of them have branched out into the community too, beyond the housing complex too. So they do some of that stuff, but they do some care coordination and that kind of stuff, supportive services. But yeah, they're excellent. We work really well with them. Definitely do. Yeah.
Good.
Great.
Good organization. Anything else? I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything.
You covered a vast territory.
A lot. I'm a talker, Joanne, at heart.
And don't we love it? You're a great guy, Gary. I can understand why you're so successful at what you do.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we
you very
really
much.
thank you because we know your heart's in it. You're not in it like nobody at Senior Solutions is in any of this for the money.
We've always said that.
But
When I talked about the job when I got it the first time, you know what the wage was? My wife goes, "Boy, I really hope you're going to love this work." $7.77 an hour.
Wow.
That was the
again?
starting wage. And in my first position was up in Deerfield Valley, and it was a 30-hour position. And I had 4 kids. So my
Wow.
wife goes, "Well, it's a good thing you put some money away for a while before I got into it." So,
Well,
but it as always, pays off in other ways. So
yeah,
definitely does.
you certainly are doing a wonderful job. That's all I can say.
Well, thank
And,
you.
thanks for sharing a lot of your insights regarding the problems that people have when they are suffering from self-neglect. And like you said, it doesn't happen overnight, and we don't know how it starts. Does it start from like a sadness?
Right. Sometimes that's
loss?
the case. The loss of a loved one,
Yeah.
isolation, depression, less activities. They're not getting involved as much as they used to at one point.
Even really
Sometimes
poor
dementia.
Gary, did you see more of that, or reports of self-neglect during the COVID period?
It's hard to say because it ebbed and flowed. I do know the social isolation is taking its toll on a lot of cases. I mean, obviously we had to really curtail our home visits, and we were trying to think of ways we could stay involved. I mean, our agency helped folks with tablets and stuff like that through grants that we had gotten. Tried every way we could to try to keep them as connected as we could. Case managers called them and talked to them on the phone much more frequent than they did before because they were making home visits in between before. We would make home visits as an exception to the rule, but for the most part, we tried not to because it's always a tough juggle, especially as a supervisor, because you're trying to weigh out your staff and their families as well as the seniors.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And you're trying to say, how can I get a balance here and protect each of them? And so it was tough. So we've tried in different ways, like I say, whether it be tablets, phone calls. We would make exceptions to the rule for some home visits, but they would, do the social distancing and the mask and maybe meet outdoors. It was tough in the wintertime to meet outdoors, obviously. But, we didn't want to make it for senior citizen go out and freeze.
Right. Yeah,
So,
that would be helpful.
we were trying to juggle as best we could and get through it. But I'll tell you, it's not from lack of wanting. I mean, case managers were just chomping at the bit to make visits. They really were. And I mean, to be honest with you, it was weighing on my heartstrings, really tough, on the end where they're wanting to go. But I'm also trying to think of their husbands or their wives and their kids.
Sure.
Tough.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad to get through this.
Yeah. The thing is, now that we're starting to open up a little more, we may find out some of the hidden problems that we're developing all across our population.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I agree with that 100%. Yeah. It's been hard on everyone, for sure.
Absolutely.
And families of loved ones. I mean, let's face it, the ones that couldn't go see them or whatever at one point, it was tough. It was really tough.
Right.
Right. But thank goodness we're coming through it. And
That's right. That's right. It's time to start being optimistic and look forward now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just in time for spring, just in time for the flowers to come forth,
Absolutely.
get outside, get more active.
Absolutely.
I'm really encouraged.
Yep. A lot of places
Absolutely.
starting to open up, and even for senior citizens, with adult days starting to expand now and open up. So it'll be good. It'll be a lot better.
Yeah, I just heard that the gathering place is reopening in Brattleboro.
Yep.
When is it? June, right?
I believe June now it is. I thought they were going to open up earlier at one time, but I guess it's June, and I guess they're not going to open up their Dover branch.
Oh, that's true. But maybe eventually we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And we didn't have Dover for many years, many years. I mean, I had one elderly lady that I worked with since I started, and she only passed away. Gosh, she passed away last year, I think. And she used to go over that mountain. When we got her to go, she went 5 days a week over the mountain from Wilmington to Brattleboro. 5 days a week, all these years. I would have wore down after the first 2 months. And I used to always say she was my poster child for adult day, because if I needed someone to go, she could certainly promote it. She really did. She really
That's a good
promoted it.
testimonial.
Very helpful. But went every day. I'm not kidding, for all those years, 5 days a week until the Dover one finally opened. And then it was tough for her to give up the Brattleboro one,
Right.
because she knew some of the folks down there. So
Yeah.
that was kind of hard. But God bless her.
Oh my gosh. Well, Gary, I don't know, Jim, you probably feel the same way, but I just have to thank you, because this has been really, really not just interesting, but gets our eyes opened to a segment of the population who really suffer in silence.
Yeah. It's tough. It's a tough population, but sometimes, let me tell you, you'd be surprised how resilient folks are.
Hey,
Really.
Sometimes I'd say to myself, my gosh, I don't know how they do that, but they do.
They do.
They do.
They do.
They manage. What do they call it here in New England? Yankee ingenuity.
Yeah.
Some things that some
They figure it out. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
yeah.
But they need support. They
Yeah.
really need support, and they do enjoy meeting and talking with people. They
Oh,
really do.
absolutely.
They love to tell stories.
Oh yeah, yeah. They must have wore it off, or I wore off on them. I don't know. But yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thanks, guys. This has been very, very interesting, and I thank you. Thank you both.
You're
Oh.
welcome, both of you.
So I guess we're going to sign off in a minute.
Right?
But for everybody out there, please go onto our website, which is www.seniorsolutionsvt.org, and check out all of our BCTV interviews. And this one will be on it shortly. Not yet. First, it has to go through the studio.
Right.
But we have many shows, and we have lots of information on the website. If you have any questions for somebody that you know or love who could really use some help, even if they don't need it, they deserve it.
And if anybody out there has some suggestions of topics that they'd like to hear from us that really relate to our elderly senior population, we'd love to hear from you.
Right. Thank you very much, Jim, because we can't dream up things all by ourselves. Sometimes we need help too.
Sure, absolutely.
So we're all in this together, people. So we'll do what we can, you do what you can, and together we're going to make everything work so much more smoothly, and everybody will feel better. So until we see you next time, Joanne,
Jim?
and Gary,
Gary.
all right? Take care, and we love you all. Bye now.
Absolutely.
Bye.